What a pleasure to welcome to our studios Clay Williams from FH&P. It is our Tuesday morning law talk as we take a look at some of the controversial issues or take a look at some of the less controversial issues, but absolutely the issues that are impacting your life, that are changing your life, that, unbeknownst to you, may be directing and prescribing which way things are going to go if you find yourself in the place where you don't want to be. Clay, I love this subject, apologies and the law. Give me a starting point here.
Well, first of all, I must say I'm still warming up here after that walk over. I'm sure not used to that.
You walked over? You didn't drive?
I only walked, 2 or 3 blocks from my office. Yeah. And boy, it's so chilly.
Well, you should know that if you're exposed to the wind chill factor is about -20, -21. So that's what you were feeling as you strolled over here.
I sure did.
No kidding.
So, I thought I'd talk about apologies today and the power of an apology and how the law treats an apology. Because, an apology is really considered to be a really powerful form of conflict resolution.
Now, are we talking the kind of apology that comes from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons? I know that the federal government apologized for the Kitagama Maru, which sat in English Bay and then turned all those Indo-Canadians back to where they had come. Many of them met death in the countries that they returned to. So that was an official apology from the government. We've apologized to the Japanese for what we did to them as we took them off the West Coast. As a nation, we've most certainly apologized to First Nations across this land, particularly when it comes to residential schools. So those are the kinds of apologies, I think, that have a liability attached to them.
Well, that's right. And so, although it's really recognized and there's a lot of literature that says how powerful an apology can be, I'm sorry, it's all my fault.
Right.
What a form of conflict resolution. It just deflates a person's anger, knowing that a person is taking responsibility. But historically, the law has treated an apology as an admission of liability. And so apologizing came at a risk. And so, and even worse than that, an apology would often breach an insurance policy, because if you say you're liable for something, then you've got no insurance.
Right.
So this really constrained governments, like you talked about, but individuals as well, in what they could say. And that's why you heard, in the mid-2000s, up to the mid-2000s, government saying, we regret what occurred.
Right.
Not very powerful.
Not saying we are sorry.
And, to give the governments credit, they recognized that. They wanted to say, we're sorry. We're sorry. It's all our fault. We're sorry. They've read the same things that I read in preparing for this, that how powerful it is, but they couldn't say it because they'd be liable.
For millions of dollars in many of these cases. I mean, let's face it, Japanese Canadians, the Indo-Canadians, First Nations, settlements of those apologies have run into the millions upon millions upon millions of dollars.
And so it really came to a head kind of in the mid-2000s, and the issue that they were facing at that time was the Doukhobors. And in the 1950s, a lot of the children were taken away from the Sons of Freedom and put into a school in New Denver. And,
you drive by, you can still see that school sitting out there on the hill. It's a brick school, looks like a gorgeous old building, but when you hear the history attached to it, maybe not so much.
Well, pretty traumatic, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no kidding.
But the expression that the government was able to give at that time was an expression of regret.
Right.
And so this came to a head, and so to give them credit, the government introduced an act called the Apology Act, and that's now the law in the province, and that basically says that you can make an apology as a citizen, as a government, and it won't attract liability. So the actual definition of apology includes not only I'm sorry, but it also includes it's all my fault.
So it makes perfectly sense when we talk about these massive inhumanities, for lack of a better word, inflicted on individuals for racist reasons or societal reasons. But does that roll back to John and Mary Front Porch in their everyday lives?
Well, absolutely. And I think that we all go to, in our minds, to Indian residential schools and those type of huge issues. But, this has the Apology Act applies to everybody. So in a motor vehicle accident, if you rear end somebody and it's really angry, it's okay. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. Really takes the conflict out of the situation.
Except that if there was a lawyer standing next to you, he'd be advising you keep your mouth shut. You don't admit anything when you're standing there on the street, because the reality is we don't know where this is going to go.
The Apology Act protects that admission from being taken into account by a court, and an insurance company cannot breach your insurance for that statement. Okay,
can we take this down even closer then, given the weather that we're dealing with right now? Individual went out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and shoveled their sidewalk in front of their residence, wherever it may be in the city. We're completely snowbound everywhere. They went out and shoveled their sidewalk at 2 in the afternoon. But at 4:30 in the afternoon, when the snow had continued, John and Mary Mixflix were walking along that piece of sidewalk. Mary lost her balance, slipped, fell, and broke her hip. Now, John and Mary Mixflix, listen to me, I'm just running off an entire courtroom scenario here. John and Mary Mixflix live just down the street a piece. They're sort of like your neighbors. So you kind of feel really bad that Mary fell and broke her hip. So you go to the hospital and you pay a visit to the dear old girl. And you say to her, I am so sorry that you fell on the sidewalk in front of my house. And her husband is sitting there, and you can see his eyes getting big. And he thinks, somebody else is going to pay. Or am I protected by that same law that you were talking about?
You're protected for that statement. And I guess there's two ways to look at that. Hopefully, her husband isn't thinking that. Hopefully, Mary is hearing what is being said by that person. And an apology is an empowering statement. And an apology puts the power in the recipient. And the power is there for that person to forgive. And so many people, and there's a lot of studies that have been done on it, would say, all I wanted was an apology.
I've heard that definitely has been heard many times, or the other way around. And he never even said that he was sorry.
And he never even said that he was. Or you get things like, I'm sorry if you were offended by my comments, or things that really don't mean an apology, that don't take responsibility. No, in that situation, the Apology Act would protect that comment. But we need to talk about what it protects and what it doesn't.
Right.
So consider,
and we will do that. We will do that right after this break. And we are in conversation, spending a little time with Clay Williams from FH&P, talking about apologies. And by going through the very fact of making an apology, are you liable for what you're apologizing for? And can you be sued? As Clay has already defined, there are ways that we are protected from the apology. But Clay, I'm still saying, so then how come we are still confronted with, or very aware, that there are any number of lawsuits that are going on out there in spite of the apology?
Well, the Apology Act doesn't protect the facts that might result in liability, but also it probably does not affect admissions that aren't an apology.
Okay.
So it's a pretty specific act, and I think it's pretty clear that it protects I'm sorry, and it's clear that it says it's my fault. But consider the person that says, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I should never have been texting while I was driving, right?
Okay.
So while it's uncertain, and there's very little case law in British Columbia that's fleshed out what the act means, but the case law from Alberta would indicate that the first two comments would be protected from the courts, but the third, I should never have been texting while I was driving, would be an admission that could be used in a court case.
But we also recognize that in that case, that I don't know, for lack of a word, particular crime has already been identified as being legally against the law. Laws have been enacted to effectively say, just as you can't drink while you're driving, you cannot text and you cannot use your phone while you're driving unless it's part of your Bluetooth system. That's a little different than some of these other areas. And indeed, if my car T-boned somebody and I killed Mary sitting in the front seat and then later went to see her husband and said, listen, I'm really sorry that happened.
Well, that's not an apology. And that was, I'm sorry that happened is almost insulting.
Yeah.
People take it as an insult rather than an apology. The law would allow you to say, I'm sorry. It's my fault. But don't go any further. I should never have been drinking while I was driving or something like that.
At that point
would
in time.
be an admission against your interest.
Right. And your lawyer sitting next to you would be saying, zipper your mouth, buddy, because you just immediately effectively handed the case to the other side to come after you.
Yeah, so the act is an attempt to allow the powerful conflict resolution of an apology to occur while still allowing, not hampering people in finding liability. The facts surrounding things are always available. So one of the only cases that's been heard in British Columbia was the case of a drunken dancing lawyer. And what happened was a law firm had a party, and one of their lawyers got very drunk and actually fell over on another lawyer, really, really hurting her. He said, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That part was protected. But the fact of the amount of drinks that he had and how he was behaving before certainly wouldn't be protected.
And so then the challenge here is to find the dividing line and which side is the part that is non-culpable, and then of course the degree of magnitude on the culpability side. And I'm not doing a very good job. I'm not sounding very lawyerly as I define this, but there are clearly points of debarkation, if you will. Yes,
I'm sorry. It's my fault. Covered.
That's
anything
one
else
side of the case.
Is maybe an admission against your interest.
Right. And I'm not trying to drum up business for a lawyer, but if I find myself in a situation like this, is it a good idea to talk to a lawyer before I contact the aggrieved party, regardless of whatever has taken place? But before I contact those people, should I contact the lawyer and say, hey, listen, here's the scenario. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Should I?
Well, always a good idea.
Yeah.
However, the part of the power of an apology is as conflict resolution. And it can be used in the heat of the moment. And remember your example, what about, just Tom, Dick, and Harry and the regular people? So I think what I want people to take away from this is you can apologize. It's not going to result in legal responsibility for you. But certainly, if you would like to go and see somebody in the hospital, well, you've got that time. Well, give us a call. Absolutely.
Right. And by showing up in the hospital, by coming to the bedside, by holding the hand of the individual and saying to them, you know what, I am so sorry. As you said.
Very often, that's all people need.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least it softens their anger, and I guess, as you might define it, effectively changes maybe the strategy or what they were going to do.
Yeah, and I think the psychology is that it empowers them. It gives them the opportunity to forgive. And one of the more famous authors on apology says, we experience forgiveness as a gift that releases us from the twin burdens of guilt and shame.
Right.
So very powerful.
Is this a profound change societally? The fact that we have identified it as a subject for this conversation, but are we talking about that we're letting go of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth? Are we, I don't know, becoming better at loving thy neighbor in spite of the pain they've inflicted upon me?
I'm not sure. I think that another way to look at it might be that historically an apology was something that was used as a method of toning down a conflict.
Right.
And more recently it became problematic to make that. I think it might be a return. And one of the same author that I quoted noted that, apologies are really rooted in religion and some societal norms.
Father, forgive them. They know not what they do.
Well, exactly. So it's not something that
one of the greatest apologies ever made. If you follow the Christian divinity and the Christian teachings as Christ was on the cross, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do.
An apology fulfills a basic human need.
Right.
And so this act is an attempt to allow people to do that.
You're almost suggesting then that when you put it in the context of a basic human need, you're almost suggesting that it's almost hardwired into our human DNA.
Well, and that's exactly what some of the academics would say. It is.
That's where the study is going. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many people, like you've said, have said, the whole thing was aggravated by the fact that they didn't apologize. They didn't seem to care.
The longer they ignored me, the less they contacted me, the more they cut me off.
Yes.
Yeah. Then my anger grew.
That's right. And now I'm seeing you, Williams.
And my friends fueled that anger because as I told my friends what had been done to me, they fed that anger and convinced me that I needed to move forward because I definitely had a case.
Fair enough.
All right. No, seriously. There's so many elements when you think about it. There are so many elements that are in play in the potential context of what might have been a very simple act that could have been easily handled with that apology until it was allowed to fester and become an angry point of aggravation.
Yes.
Yeah. So is your practice taking on these sorts of cases? Have you had a few?
Very rarely. Like I say, there's very little law where it has actually been considered. I think the Act's pretty clear that the ones that have come before the court, it hasn't really been controversial.
Right.
I'm sorry. It's my fault. It's protected from the courts.
Right.
And protected from breaching your insurance. Protects you from it being used as an affirmation to extend a limitation period. That's pretty clear. It's the other stuff where it's still there's still
where
some
you get involved.
Well, it's
potentially.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I shouldn't have hit you. Probably covered.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been, fiddling with my cell phone or something like that. That's not covered. So.
Yeah. All right. Clay, I appreciate you being here. I wish I had a shuttle service that I could offer you to take you back to 275 Lawrence Avenue.
Yeah, it was 2 or 3 blocks, I think.
Yeah, right. It
I
felt
just
like
hope I don't see somebody I know that wants to talk to me, so I got to get back inside.
Clay Williams can be found at FH&P. They are on the 4th floor at 275 Lawrence. His direct line is 762-4222.
Yeah, that's our office number.
Oh, that's the office number. Okay, direct line, 869-6015.
There you go. Yeah.
Or the better thing, as I always suggest, you might really want to do is go to Google and type in FHPlawyers.com. It will get you to the website. Then you can go down the roster of the lawyers who are represented there, and you will find Clay Williams, good guy to know, good guy to talk to, as you've heard this morning here at AM 1150. Clay, to you, Merry Christmas, sir.
Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you.
you.
As he reaches across the console here and shakes his hand in a Merry Christmas gesture. We don't say that often enough in the world, is Merry Christmas. And here's to a very good New Year in hard to believe, 2017 is just weeks away.
It really is. It really is. Thank you for the wishes, and thank you for having me.
Appreciate you being here. FH&P on Tuesdays. It's Law Talk with various lawyers from FH&P. Started years ago by Jim Herpiger, who is the H in FH&P. He retired officially just last week from the radio station. We said goodbye to him here. Have you done the big party yet? Is there going to be some great big official function where he's going to be paraded out and presented with a retrospective of his life at FH&P?
Absolutely, and I love the way you put it. Parade him out.
He's a good guy.
That's great. So absolutely, we're planning a couple functions actually. So.
Absolutely. All right. Pleasure. Thank you.